The Chair of the Wheat Ridge Planning Commission. I'd like to welcome everybody to our meeting for August 19th, 2021. Before we begin, here are a few notes about our meeting format. Tonight we will have planning commissioners and staff attending in person as well as members of the public. Based on current health guidance, we recommend commissioners and all those attending in person wear a face mask during the meeting. We are also broadcasting this meeting for viewers on Channel 8 and wheatridgespeaks.org. Members of the public who are not present and wish to make comments may participate virtually by joining through Zoom, either on a device or by calling in. The Zoom meeting information is provided on wheatridgespeaks.org. When it is time for public comment at the start of the meeting, we will first call on those who wish to speak in person, followed by anyone attending the meeting online and speaking through our Zoom connection. If you are speaking tonight online, please keep background noise to a minimum. If you do not plan to participate at all this evening, we recommend you simply view the meeting live by watching on Channel 8 or on wheatridgespeaks.org. We appreciate your participation in tonight's meeting. We hope to create a friendly and respectful atmosphere for public dialogue, and we appreciate your help in this process. I'd like to now call to order the City of Wheat Ridge Planning Commission for August 19, 2021. May I get a roll call of members, please?
Melissa Antle. Present. Christine Disney.
Present.
Will Kearns.
Here.
Daniel Larson.
Here.
Scott Ohm.
Here.
Jahi Simbai.
Here.
And Ari Krichiver and Janet Leo are absent tonight.
Thank you. The next order on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now we will approve the order of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the order of the agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move to approve the order of the agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Let's call for a vote.
Motion passed 6-0.
Next item is citizen comment on the agenda item tonight. Tonight's meeting is a study session, and we have only one agenda item, the Lutheran Legacy Campus Master Plan. We will now welcome public comment on that topic. If you'd like to comment on this item, you'll have a maximum of 3 minutes to speak. Speakers may not donate their time. If you plan to speak, please give us your name, spell your last name, and share your address. We will not be taking public comment later, so now is the opportunity to speak. Is there anyone signed up to speak in person?
Nobody has signed up.
There are no persons signed up to speak in person. Is there anyone else from the public who would like to speak on our agenda items online, virtually?
I'm not seeing anybody from the general public in the Zoom.
There are nobody lined up online to speak.
Correct.
Okay. This is the last chance for public comment tonight. Thank you. I will now close our public comment period. Tonight we'll be in a study session on a single topic, an update on the Lutheran Legacy Campus Master Plan. First, we'll hear an introduction by staff, followed by an update presentation by the project consultant. Turn it over to Lauren.
Thank you. Good evening. We're happy to be here tonight with the whole meeting just to talk about the Lutheran campus. It's been almost 3 months since we talked about the project with you all. It was back in May. We had a study session. And we've had a very busy summer since then. Lots of different public input in a variety of different formats. We summarized that for you in the memo. As of this week, we've actually already exceeded 2,000 unique visitors to the project site. So awareness of the project is increasing and sort of ever improving, which has been great to see. As you know, that's a relatively new platform that we have in the last year or so. It's been well utilized. Tonight we'll be sharing a summary of the public input that we've received to date. We'll be sharing with you some of the conceptual plans that we have been seeking feedback on, and then an update just generally where we are in the process. Presenting tonight is Jay Rankins. He's a principal in charge with MIG. You met him in May as well. He's going to do the presentation, and then we'll have questions and answers. Also joining us tonight on the Zoom meeting is Stephen Chung representing SCL, so I'll add him into the meeting when we get to the Q&A as well, if we have questions for them.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you all for your time this evening. We're really excited to present to you all. We've made a lot of progress since we saw you last. What we'd like to do is give you a brief introduction. We're going to cover visioning and key themes, which is actually part of our phase 1 work. Then looking at preliminary alternatives, we actually had a large community meeting in this space nearly 2 weeks ago, I think it was. And then we had an online survey. So I guess this is 2.5 weeks ago, and then an online survey for another week. So we're here to provide that feedback to you and talk about some next steps. So I think everyone is aware of where the Lutheran campus is currently. It extends from Dudley on the west, portions of Allison Street and Court and Zephyr on the east, 32nd on the south, and 38th on the north. One of the things that we've been really trying to remind folks of throughout the process is we don't want to look at this property just in isolation. When the comprehensive plan was developed and the structure plan, a different future for this campus was not really contemplated. It was designated as community open space and an employment center, which as a hospital campus makes a lot of sense. As we're contemplating a different future for this campus moving forward, we want to think about how does that fit within the larger city landscape as well as the regional landscape. How does that help meet certain different community needs as articulated in the comprehensive plan more broadly as well as in the more recent NRS work. So in the phase 1 work, we were really talking big picture about what people wanted to see, didn't want to see. And we started on May 1st with a self-guided campus tour, which ended up being a pretty large sort of outdoor open house. We received a lot of input. We had a series of stakeholder steering committee meetings during phase 1, and those have continued since. We presented to you all in initial study sessions back in May. We've done 2 rounds of focus groups. The first round being in this phase 1 with a neighborhood group, community group, and a business focus group. Public meeting number 2 was a virtual meeting where we got into, and I'll present some results from that in a second, got into different areas of the campus. So instead of just that broader look, looking at different zones as we had mapped them and what people wanted to see and didn't want to see. That was replicated online. We did facility focus group tours with some of the public partners because people had begun to articulate this desire to maybe see some civic uses on the site. And then finally, email and phone questions and comments throughout. This is not meant to be legible on the screen necessarily, but just a sample of how we've been capturing a lot of comments. Most of the outreach has in fact been virtual, so we've been using mural boards to capture those different ideas and comments and share the screen, so this is just a sampling. Some of the key takeaways from round 1 community focus groups, people wanted to really consider the reuse of the existing facilities. We heard a lot about the Blue House and the chapel, but also the existing hospital facilities, as well as the behavioral health facilities. And then I'll point this out as we move forward, but there is a medical office building along 38th on the northwest corner of the site, as well as the hospice along 32nd that are intended to stay. We also heard a lot of varying input about the transportation network, people wanting to make sure that maybe this actually becomes more walkable, more accessible and inviting, but worried that if there is a lot of additional vehicular traffic or vehicular connectivity created, that might create cut-through traffic through the neighborhood, as well as maybe additional congestion on 32nd and 38th. We heard about the natural features on the site, the great trees, the ditch, which I guess you could argue is maybe a man-made feature, but has a very nice natural appeal to it, and it's right along the kind of bluff midway through the site, which has about 50 feet of grade difference So really wanting to work with the site rather than come in and scrape it clean or just make it a flat site. And then finally, a lot of interest in community amenities of a variety of types, both facilities, outdoor spaces, parks and recreation opportunities, and things like farmers markets and community gardens. The business focus group was focused a little bit more on the land uses, talking about different types of housing, thinking about how those might fit within the larger neighborhood context that surrounds the Lutheran campus today. So thinking about how maybe that ramps up from the edges, becomes more dense in the middle, thinking about mixed use development and a variety of housing, including affordable housing and senior housing, looking at maybe having free public amenities and whether that be privately provided amenities that are accessible to the public or actual public amenities, things that would draw folks from around the community to the site, particularly if we're going to have any sort of a commercial product or mixed use product, to make sure that that would be supported. And then finally thinking a little further ahead about implementation, that maybe there's opportunities with historic designations of one or more of the existing facilities for historic tax credits. Some of the common themes that we heard throughout all three included that density transition, this idea of creating a mixed-use environment. People really want to make sure that we're not competing with what's happening on Wadsworth and 38th, but also see that that doesn't necessarily provide today that walkable kind of downtown or Main Street environment that some of the surrounding communities have. So not trying to replicate that necessarily, but trying to do something that's complementary to those great commercial corridors we have nearby. Also looking at a variety of public amenities, I said, but also of housing for a diversity of people. So not only does that consider price point, but people have talked about different stages of life. So families, young professionals, seniors, so on and so forth. In our public meeting, which was virtual, that was in early June, we had about 50 attendees, and we went through a series of exercises looking at different portions of the site. So the map in the lower right shows zones 1, 2, 3, and 4 that we've created basically using the existing road network and the ditch. So zone 1 is on the west side of the campus. And when we asked folks what they wanted to see there, they indicated open space, duplexes, triplexes, and townhomes and single family homes. So basically lower density and kind of missing middle housing and open space being the most desirable for zone 1. When we went to zone 2, which is where the existing hospital sits, along with the Blue House, the chapel, the North Tower as part of the hospital, the most recent expansion, and some parking, people indicated that their most desirable uses would be civic or office, retail or dining, entertainment, and apartments or condominiums being the most popular housing type for that area. Next, going to zone 3, people indicated civic or office, and this, in case you're not super familiar with the middle portion of the site, this is where the medical office buildings are located, just north of south of the ditch, in a large parking area. One thing to note, and I can try to remind you all this as we're stepping through the alternatives as well, those 3 medical office buildings are in fact controlled by a real estate investment trust. So they have, they are sort of tracking with the process, but slightly different than the rest of the campus, which is owned by and controlled by SCL. So the most popular there were civic or office, retail or dining, open space, and entertainment. As far as housing was concerned, which were all 3 types were lower than those first 4 that I mentioned, apartments or condominiums were the most popular. And then finally, zone 4, this is where we have the behavioral health facilities, some parking, and the hospice care. People indicated open space again, and then single-family homes and duplexes or townhomes, pretty closely mirroring what we were seeing in zone 1 as the most desirable uses. So overall, from phase 1, we're summarizing these key themes as really thinking about the history and legacy of the campus. This has been a contributory part of the landscape of Wheat Ridge, and people are, I think, not everyone maybe as quickly as everybody else, but they're understanding that this will be changing. And so as it changes, people want to make sure that it's continuing to be a really great asset for everybody across the community. Looking at this opportunity to create a center for the community anchored with civic and cultural uses, I think there's also an understanding that it can't all be civic and cultural uses, but I'll share this towards the end of the presentation. I've started to facilitate a discussion about what are those trade-offs. How much are you willing to give to get in certain regards? Looking for, similarly, parks, open space, particularly as buffers to those existing homes. Both concern and desire for housing and increased connectivity, meaning that we're really hearing a mixed bag, honestly. So a lot of people saying that they don't want anything other than single-family homes, and maybe not even single-family homes on lots smaller than a quarter acre. Whereas other people are saying, this is our opportunity to create a diversity of housing, so we want missing middle housing and apartments and condominiums, because where else are we going to do it? Similarly on the connectivity, people wanting, particularly, and maybe this is a consensus, better pedestrian and bicycle connectivity, but really kind of mixed ideas on additional vehicular access or circulation. And then finally, that idea of creating some locally serving retail, dining, and entertainment. So that brings us to our preliminary alternatives. So coming out of all of that input from phase one, we developed 3 alternative concepts, and we really tried to make sure that all of them were sort of optimized and sort of conveying different ideas that we had heard, and in some cases that I mentioned to you were conflicting, but that all of them really could work and reflected the input from the community. So our common starting points for these were thinking about the existing regulatory considerations. I think you all are well aware of these, but the new residential development height limit of 35 feet, new non-residential development height limit of 50 feet. We have looked at portions of the hospital, the North Tower, the original hospital building and some of its expansion exceed 100 feet. And if those were to be adaptively reused in the future, those could actually include residential, non-residential, and could retain that height. And then also looking at the overall density limit of 21 units per acre. At 100 acres for the entire campus would be 2,100 residential units. Well, I'll show you a slide in just a second. There is probably demand to absorb that over a 10 to 15 year time period. It would be very challenging to fit that many units on this site, given the desire to keep some of those natural constraints, the existing roadways, so on and so forth. Then thinking about, of those 100 acres, what is sort of spoken for already? We have about 6 acres in the Rocky Mountain Ditch. The 2.5 acres for the Foothills Medical Office Building and the hospice. That's in that northwest corner and in the south, respectively. So it's another 7.5 acres. About 7.5 acres for major roadways, especially when we start to think about those probably being brought up to some sort of a city standard at 75 to 80 feet wide at least. The North Tower probably has the best ability to be adaptively reused. There's portions of the building that are still in shell condition, and it's a relatively new building. So of all the spaces attached to the existing hospital, that's probably the most likely. Not that it's a guarantee that it would be adaptively reused, but about 3 acres. And then thinking about office uses, the medical office buildings that I mentioned, controlled by the REIT, are about 6.75 acres when you include the buildings and the surrounding landscaping and parking. So that leaves us with just under 70 acres that we're really kind of playing with in these different concepts. The market, as I mentioned, would support a wide variety of residential units, could absorb that full 2,100 units, although we're not approaching that in any of these 3 concepts. The retail and commercial, you have to kind of keep in mind that this is not, it's off the beaten path a little bit. It's not connected to 38th, it's off of Wadsworth, and so we need to kind of couch our expectations appropriately. So our market analysts on the team, Economic and Planning Systems, have indicated that that's probably about 50,000 square feet. So a coffee shop, a few restaurants, maybe a small locally serving store. Then the office and employment I had already mentioned, somewhat equivalent to what's already on site. And then looking at that employment legacy, the big takeaway here, we've listed some ideas that have come up through the process and that our market analysts have vetted, but mainly that idea of having one office user, one corporate, tenant come in and, develop its own campus it's a possibility, but it's very unlikely. So we want to continue to explore these other opportunities, but maybe allow for some flexibility should, one of those opportunities arise in the future. And then because we've had so many concerns about the traffic, we wanted to just look at what would happen, let's say we've, a pretty intensive use that people have talked about is, multifamily or middle density housing. When you look at that compared to the existing conditions on the site, the number of trips generated during the AM and PM peak actually would decrease. So we just wanted to let people know that, so as they were looking at the different concepts, they weren't frightened by the new development kind of equating that inappropriately to more trips. So we know that in the next stages, you're basically going to see in 3 slides from now, land use bubbles on these different concepts. We know that we need to look at and assess, is there other kind of framework level infrastructure needed, particularly on the transportation side. Regardless, there will be recommendations in the plan looking at intersections and access, thinking about, avoiding that cut-through traffic through neighborhoods. How do we get more people out of their cars with transportation demand management? And then, as the community has expressed over and over again, improving that bicycle and pedestrian connectivity to and through the campus. And then, obviously, transit being another opportunity to get people out of cars. So our preliminary alternatives, we have 3. We're calling them just A, B, and C for simplicity. We have had quite a bit of outreach around these already in a pretty short amount of time. So we had a stakeholder steering committee meeting where we tested these 3 concepts and got input. We had the round 2 of neighborhood, community, and business focus groups. The public meeting number 3, What's Up Wheat Ridge online engagement extended another week beyond that meeting. And then earlier this week, we did a study session with council, and then the study session this evening with you all. Similarly, a sampling of our focus group mural. Our public meeting was on August 3rd. We had over 100 attendees, actually, a really great turnout. And then that online survey. A couple things to point out on the survey. We had about 164 total respondents, 93% of those living in Wheat Ridge. Higher percentage of females than the overall population in Wheat Ridge, about the same on the race, with 91% identifying as white. And then age, despite some of our earlier outreach and even the community meeting, which tended to be sort of lean to the older population, we ended up having a really good dispersion of ages on the online survey. So we feel as though across all those different methods, we got a really good representation of the overall community. And similarly with how long people have lived in Wheat Ridge, a good distribution again. So I have a series of diagrams, a plan view. You'll see an oblique aerial shot, some precedent photos, and then we'll summarize what we've heard so far on each concept from the community. So this first concept really looks at what the community expressed in terms of low-density residential, basically single-family residential most likely, on the west and south edges. This actually retains the behavioral health facility, West Pines on the east. It does introduce townhomes, which was something that was sort of supported to a certain degree in the community meeting, but something we wanted to test in at least one of the concepts that's on the east, northeast side. Conceptually, this puts Civic right in the middle of the site, multifamily north of the ditch with mixed use and retail along 38. So in this concept, we'd be trying to maybe have a breadcrumb of retail or commercial kind of connecting to what's happening eastward on 38. With really the rest of the site being multifamily and then that Civic tucked in the middle. So some precedent images for those looking online, some bullets in case they're not hearing me speak about this. And then the oblique aerial shot is basically looking from above the cemetery. We're looking northwest across the site. Just another perspective here. And so what did the community express so far that they like and don't like about Concept A? People really like that in this concept we expanded that open space that's along the ditch. We added multiple park-like spaces along the ditch. They liked some people liked the large central civic space. Others actually said that they thought it might be too large, and we heard that they thought it might be inaccessible or maybe not feel as welcoming if it's tucked in the middle of the campus as it is today. Looking at other likes, diversity of housing types, and some people said they liked the mix of uses along 38th, while others thought maybe those were too intensive along 38th, particularly adjacent to the single-family homes to the north. Lastly, and this really, I guess, applies to all of the concepts because we didn't include a small amount of retail or mixed use in all. There was some concern that there's already vacancies in some of the commercial spaces around Wheat Ridge and relatively nearby to the campus, and so a concern about maybe cannibalizing from those or filling these new spaces before filling what we have already. Again, this is a 10, 15, maybe even 20-year prospect, so hopefully that won't be the case post-pandemic, but a concern that I wanted to know. Concept B looks at pushing more of those townhomes towards the edge, so really tried to create more of the middle density and even, kind of the higher to medium density housing on the site. Did include a pocket of low density residential where West Pines is today. And then has a smaller civic footprint and smaller office footprint, kind of using the ditch as an organizing feature. You could imagine some of that mixed use development, particularly on the south edge along the ditch, kind of orienting to the ditch as well and creating this really neat trail-oriented development. And then presumably there'd be some element of retail in the mixed use space as well. One thing that our market analysts have indicated is that mixed use, while there could be some expectation for some vertically integrated mixed use, more than likely it's going to be a horizontal mix with some apartments, maybe some commercial buildings, a small office building, but really trying to create some flexibility in that northern space. Again, the ditch as an organizing element, open spaces on the eastern and western edges oriented at 35th, and you can see that here. So really trying to think about those community spaces, which are about the size of a community park, about 5 acres apiece, being kind of something that would stitch the existing neighborhood to new development on the campus. And so what do people like and not like about this one? Again, some varying opinions about mixed use along 38th, some concern about the intensity there. Also some skepticism before we kind of helped define what the mixed use was, that any sort of vertical mixed use would even be feasible. People liked that the density seemed to be concentrated in the center with it stepping down to the edges. We definitely heard from some folks though that even stepping down to a townhome product was too dense for the site, particularly adjacent to the single family homes that exist immediately adjacent to it. And then some folks thought that this was too small of a civic footprint on the campus. Concept C, which probably has maybe just edged out Concept A overall in terms of what people are generally liking, and so what we expect is that a preferred concept framework plan level would emerge from mostly A and C with maybe some elements of B. But Concept C has low density residential or open space adjacent to all of the existing single family homes. It then steps up from the low density residential to a townhome product and ultimately to multifamily in the center of the site. And then actually attempts to use Lutheran Parkway Boulevard for a sort of a semblance of a main street. So obviously it would take some improvements to that access. It's that northeast access into the site. But looking at creating maybe It could be with adaptive reuse of the blue house being a component of that, but a series of smaller structures, kind of playing with that clay of the 50,000, square feet of retail to create a nice local destination for all of the neighborhoods around it. And then office and civic uses extending along 38th, kind of building along or upon that medical office building that would be remaining in the northwest corner. So the likes and dislikes. So we actually had quite a bit of support for this idea of the Main Street concept, although there were definitely some dissenting voices. Some people thinking that that was inappropriate to have a Main Street that close to the existing neighborhoods. The parks and low-density housing buffering the existing community, I think, was, as far as the adjacency to the existing neighborhoods, probably the most preferable. Accessibility and connectivity for the current residents, thinking about, being able to access the site and maybe even that retail for the people who were fans of that through open space and on trails. Density concentrated again in the center and stepping down to the edges. Some of the dislikes included the open space along the Rocky Mountain Ditch and the green connectors through the site. They'd like to see more of it. So they're kind of keying in on those other concepts. We were hanging more of those kind of open spaces along the ditch. This sort of retains its existing footprint. Some folks thought that there was too much multifamily in this one. And then also the amount of office space was a concern. People really kind of hanging on to the idea of this being an employment center, a major employment center for the community, and thinking that we're losing too much of that in this particular concept. So last piece here, and then Lauren and I and Steve will be available for questions and conversation. But we wanted to start to have this conversation about trade-offs. So far we're in kind of this, even in those oblique aerial views, we're in a 2D, colored bubble kind of format. Some of the density is inherent in a low-density residential, townhome, you can kind of imagine. But when we come to multifamily, it's unlikely that a multifamily product would be developed within that 35-foot residential height limit that exists today. And so as people have been talking about wanting more civic space, more community space, park space, open space on the campus, we have been keying in on some of the folks who have been talking about, well, I'd be willing to have some more density if we had more community benefits as a result of that. And so we asked the question explicitly in the community meeting and on the online survey on Let's Hope Wheat Ridge, sort of linking either no additional height with no additional community space. We did low, medium, and high. And I think honestly, myself heading into it, I was assuming it was going to be no or low as sort of the emerging kind of consensus. And at least from the folks that we've heard from so far, which would be about 265 folks, we're hearing that medium is actually kind of the preference. A medium increase in height, which wasn't defined. It wasn't a specific, number of feet, but medium additional height for a medium amount of community space. I not only was a little surprised by that, but the next question asked where people thought that should be on the site. And my assumption, based on a lot of discussions already through this process, as well as some of the detailed info we're getting from focus groups, was that Zone 2 would emerge as that, likely space for increased height, because it already has 100-foot plus buildings. It did emerge as one of the more popular spaces, but Zone 3 actually, kind of right in the middle of the site where the existing medical office buildings are and large surface parking, actually kind of rose to the top, with 47.8% indicating that would be their preference. So as we move forward, we will begin exploring what that height and what that trade-off looks like in more detail. What we know for sure is that folks really like this idea of the sort of lowest height, lowest density on the edges, particularly adjacent to the single-family neighborhoods, and really, are at least beginning to open their minds to or even embrace this idea of additional height towards the center. So this is just an example of one of the types of studies that we'll be doing. This is of the campus as far as the topography. So it's the top line there is extending from 32nd on the left to 38th on the north. Actually extends into sort of the beginnings of the single-family neighborhood. And what it shows is that we have about a 50-foot drop across the site. As I said earlier, most of that elevation change is around where the ditch is. And so there's an opportunity, particularly, as we look at the areas north of the ditch, but as the community has expressed, we'll explore south of the ditch as well, where we could actually not hide the height necessarily, but achieve some density there that wouldn't be felt nearly as much as if you're putting the height on the highest part of the site, or you're putting the height immediately adjacent to existing single-family homes. The next line down is basically the 32nd to the ditch, just zoomed in, and the bottom line there is the ditch to 38th. We'll be doing something similar, looking at different sections across in the east-west direction to think about not only from this kind of elevation view, but also from kind of the human eye perspective. What might the visual impact be of different types of development and different density of development on the campus. Last slide here with some additional considerations. Mentioned the height multiple times and this idea of tapering off. People really wanted to minimize the impact on the site edges, ideally having some sort of buffer there. A lot of interest, particularly here, I think it ramped up around the time of the community meeting, thinking about senior housing opportunities. And maybe even transitional housing being a component of that. Looking at the site as a destination to attract visitors, and I think there it's not so much we want to make this a regional destination for people to come from far and wide, but that it's an asset still for the city of Wheat Ridge residents. Looking at preserving the historic elements of the site, I only mentioned a couple times, but we have heard in every single one of our conversations the community's passion for retaining the Blue House and the chapel, and then considering other facilities on the site or buildings on the site. Maintaining that small town feel, maybe incorporating some agricultural features such as gardens, and then finally looking at home ownership opportunities for younger residents. I lied, one more slide. Next steps. So our Planning Commission study session is happening right now. So looking at those following 3 bullets, we'll be developing a preferred development framework using all the input we've received in phase 2. We'll have another public meeting, that'll be public meeting number 4, on the preferred concept and plan recommendations. And then once we receive that input from the community, we'll adjust the framework, articulate some of those key recommendations even further, begin to tee up some of the implementation strategy, and document that in the draft plan and be before you all with that in a few months. So thank you so much.
Mr. Chair, before we jump into questions and answers, we did have one single member of the public join us in the Zoom format, and they got in touch with me during the presentation. He missed the public forum, and you do have the option to waive your rules temporarily if you're inclined to hear a comment from our one member of the public joining us.
So the request is a member of the public would like to speak online.
Yes.
Any commissioners object? Then we will allow it.
Great, thank you. Everett, can you hear me? You should be able to unmute yourself and go ahead and talk about the Lutheran plan.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank
Everett,
you.
can I really quick get your address, please, and the correct spelling of your name?
Yes, my address is 9395 West 38th Avenue. It's EVERETT, Coleman, COLEMAN.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I just would like to speak and advocate for the importance of the land itself. And I I heard mention of agriculture maybe once or twice in passing, and I'd really like to put a spotlight on that, and I just really value it as a community member, and I know there's a lot of community members that I've met here in Wheat Ridge that value the land and the agriculture. I've been a part of a workshop called Regenerate Wheat Ridge, and they've been teaching me about regenerative agriculture and how important it is um, to be a part of, maintaining some sort of like ecological um, protection in part of this land. I would like to see that um, be a piece of it, and I know that it would serve well with your plans in the fact that it brings community together in so many different ways. Um, I could really see that being a real asset to Wheat Ridge as a whole. I've been at the Happiness Gardens. It's beautiful. It's kind of a limited space, and I think there's ooh, it looks like you froze.
We can still hear you. You're good.
Okay. Um, but yeah, I'd just like to advocate for the land itself, because I know there's a lot of passionate Wheat Ridge community members um, that would be a part of that.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak?
No, they're not. Thank you for allowing that. The balance of the meeting is really a chance for you all to ask questions of Jay and myself and Stephen Chung. He's the Senior Vice President of Real Estate with SCL. I honestly can't remember if we had the chance to introduce him to you in May or not. We did. Okay, you're nodding. Maybe we did. Sorry, it's been a long and busy process. So he's here too, so I'll enable his ability to speak if you have questions for him. Unlike some study sessions, we're not seeking specific consensus or direction. It really is just a chance for feedback and questions and answers, so you feel like you have your heads wrapped around it and you can give us open feedback. After this meeting, we'll be sort of drafting the master plan, and so the next time you'll see it is when we're requesting you to adopt it as an amendment to the comprehensive plan in October. So I'll turn it over to you.
So Lauren, so I understand that the interim will continue, there'll be a master plan developed, and then the master plan, the draft, will come back in front of the planning commission?
It will be essentially a draft, but it will be sort of the final draft, I guess we'll say. We'll present a draft at the September 22nd public meeting, kind of an open house format to say, we heard everything you've said since April, here's where we've landed, maybe a few small tweaks, but the October meeting will be a public hearing format, requesting a formal motion to recommend, hopefully, approval of adoption of that plan as an amendment to the city's comprehensive plan. So no more work session.
So then if there are, we get down the road and there's a development involving a building that, request that comes in for a building, say, taller than what the permits are allowed, what is permitted, that then would come back as an individual item before planning?
Yeah,
Or-
that's a good first question, just a good reminder maybe on how this process relates to the whole spectrum of development cases that you all see. So at the broadest level, we have the citywide comprehensive plan, Envision Wheat Ridge. That's our 20-year document. This document, like some of our other 38th Avenue corridor plans, the transit area has a corridor plan. This is an amendment to the comprehensive plan that says we've got a specific area that we need to have a more specific guiding document for. The next step after this master plan process is complete is that the property will be put on the market and interested developers or buyers will approach SCL, will very likely approach the city. We'll be provided with this document that says, here's what we expect as a community. And then they will have to go through a zone change application. And that is very likely the next time you will see something as a commission related to the property will be that request for a zone change. Could be a mixed use district, could very likely be a planned mixed-use district where you'll see something property-specific that outlines how their proposal complies with the master plan.
Okay. Yes, that helps a lot.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rather than poll the commissioners, I will just kind of open the floor to whoever would like to step up with a question. Commissioner Disney?
Thank you. My first observation of the three examples that you give is that really you're paying attention to the east, west, and south side of this development, considering low density. It appears that the north side is where you're putting in a concept A, mixed family, mixed use in B, and then in C, we finally get everything pushed back to the middle. There is a residential neighborhood to the north of this property that I represent. I've heard from residents in that area who are, one, concerned, as you mentioned earlier in your comments, about cut-through traffic. Of the three examples that you've given here tonight, I prefer concept A with the amendment or alteration and flipping the Civic closer to 38th and moving the mixed use, as people have indicated, wanting it more towards the center. I do think that there probably is a little too much multifamily towards the center and the Civic towards the north side. I'd like to see more park in all of these. And I guess my overall observation is every square inch of this is housing, pretty much, or office buildings, and not a lot of green space and not a lot of attention to the agriculture concept, where I don't know exactly how that would manifest. I'm thinking about a development as you go north on 287 towards Longmont, and it sits on the west side of the highway, surrounded by trees, and when you get back in there, it is a lot of really neat single-family homes, some townhomes, which are very nice, and I don't believe there's any apartments. And it would seem that this 69 acres gives us an opportunity to come up with something really unique like that area is. I want to comment also on the process. I'm very impressed at the attention the city has given to this, taking input from residents, educating residents on how development happens, and surviving the public comment meeting where we had some people who were less than hospitable towards you. That was totally uncalled for. And I'm grateful that Lutheran is engaging in this process, because I know a lot of people are afraid they'll just sell the land and let whatever come what may. So this is reassuring. I would just like to really emphasize, representing District 2, that we would prefer to have the heavier density stuff pushed towards the middle, and that area along 38th either be offices or retail or civic, as you show in concept C, and not have so much housing right there in our face as we look towards that development from our sleepy little neighborhood. That's all.
There we go. Thank you, Commissioner Disney. Commissioner Ohm.
Thank you. The first question I have is, we had a case a long time ago that had, it's in my neighborhood, it has like 90 townhome units. And on that particular project, I recollect that they said there were 750 peak daily trips for those 90 townhomes. Does that sound about right?
That could be, yeah, usually it's about, you were gonna say the same. There's an ITE, International Transportation Engineers. They come up with a number of trips per day per land
Right.
use. The table that we saw tonight was the peak hour, not the total, so.
Okay, because it's, because I'm looking at it, thinking like, well, that project was 8.33 trips per unit, but this one's only showing 1.11.
You want to speak that, the difference?
And I just, a question that I hear from people is, how much traffic is there? And if I look at this, it looks like, well, there's really not that much daily.
Yeah, so the table that we included is specifically 1 hour in the AM, the peak hour when you see the most travel due to school traffic, people traveling to work, commuting to work, and then
Okay.
the PM peak hour. And the other number that you're referencing is the total day. So it includes both AM and PM peak added together, plus all those other 22 hours. So we can, when we come back to you, we could have that information if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd like to see the total daily peak hour traffic. And then on the, going a couple pages more, they're not, and it might help if, it might help, it's hard to refer to which ones because there's no page numbers on, but it says potential multimodal connections. And one of the questions I have is, if we're adding the 2,100 housing units to the site, that's going to potentially be, quite a few kids going to school. I know that I bike up and down. I go through the hospital all the time. I go bike up and I go on 32nd and out through Clear Creek. And yesterday, as I was biking, I saw the high school, but there's no sidewalk that connects the hospital all the way to the high school. And so that individual she's on her phone, which is typical of teenagers. She's not even paying attention. She's in the bike lane, and I got a car on the left of me, which is a little nerve-wracking because, it's not very safe. But she doesn't really have any options because there's no sidewalk. And so I would really encourage the city to really look at, like, hey, if we're going to add 2,100 housing units, there's obviously going to be a lot of kids going to that high school. We really need some safe connections to that.
Thank you. Could I just, one
Yes,
clarification? The 2,100 units was just looking at the charter's limitation of
Right.
21 units per acre. In the concepts that we're showing, we're probably in the 800 to 1,200 unit range, just
Okay.
for context.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, but it's at any rate.
But you're absolutely right about children and families, and yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So then I'm looking at Concept A. I would like to see if you could provide a total acreage for each category, for each concept, so I can kind of compare apples to apples and go, oh, this one has this much
Yeah.
park space or this much civic.
Do a quick side-by-side
Yeah, it's just a
comparison.
little easier to digest. I can see it graphically, and my quick comment is overall, they're all really interesting. There's going to be some stuff I kind of like, some stuff I maybe don't like, but they're all definitely have some merits on them. The one question I had is, and I'm very familiar with the site, with the elevation, everything that's going on. So I'm thinking, where on that concept day, you're showing the multifamily, which is closer to 38th.
Mhm.
And some pros might be that, are you thinking, because that's multifamily, that you're going to be reusing the hospital for residential units? Was that a
So
correct?
in all three concepts, there's the possibility, we tried to make them work with or without retaining the existing North Tower building, the Blue House, and the chapel.
Okay.
Knowing that the city doesn't have control over what happens with those
Right.
facilities. But yeah, it was sort of one of the drivers, was thinking about that adaptive reuse of the North Tower.
So as I'm thinking about that multifamily, some pros are definitely, obviously, that is the lowest part of the site. And so height, nobody really sees it. I live very close to this, just a few blocks to the north, and I can see the hospital a little bit. It doesn't really bother me, as far as that height. But the other thing I'm thinking of is that, if you're gonna have that multifamily, that's gonna be the highest density. I wanna make some assumptions that maybe a good portion of those people might really want, multi-mode transit, getting on a bus station. And that, where are you gonna put those on the site that's gonna make the most sense? Those people probably wanna go to either 32nd or 38th. And typically that multifamily is probably gonna if there's nothing on the ground, we're just looking at elevation, that multifamily is probably gonna have the tallest building of the other ones.
Of the
And
new
so,
structures.
yeah, and so I kind of feel that I can see it being closer to 38 if we already have existing structures, we're repurposing those. And then the other, the pocket parks, and this is just my opinion, they're pretty small, 1.5 acres. Where I live, there's not a lot of parks where I can go to. I can go to Wilmer Davis and use that after school hours if I wanted to. It's a small area to the north. Otherwise, I can go to Discovery, which is all the way on Kipling. It's quite a long ways. Or I could go to Crown Hill, but there's not a lot of active areas. And so the 1.5 acres is pretty small. I'd like to rather see a larger park, which on some of the other concepts, there are larger parks. Where you're showing that townhome on the far east side, south of the retail, I know that I know right now it's a detention, and I know reading some very old city council comments that has been a problem for those residents of getting inundated with water. If you put the townhomes there, you obviously would have to get rid of that detention. Would that detention be, I guess, split up and moved around to other parts of the project site?
So, yeah, for clarification, on the east side of that eastern access road, there is parking and then a detention
The
area.
detention, yeah.
So in all of these colored blobs or shapes on here, we would have to account for drainage.
Okay.
We'd have to account for landscaping, a certain amount of pervious surface, as well as parking. So they wouldn't be wall-to-wall townhomes
Okay.
in that circle or any of the others. But yes, that would be a really important consideration, is the drainage and the impact on the adjacent properties.
And then I think probably my last question is on the last one, the concept C. I think the retail is interesting, having that, cross each other from the street. That generally is a good thing to have that retail opposite each other. But I do have concerns of that very narrow park space that we would be creating. And my concern is that's going to become an area that is be perceived as not safe. Because you're going to be hidden. You're going to have a fence on the east side with homes, and you're going to have retail. And I'm just not sure, and I understand the scale. I just feel like that space is going to feel not very safe for me to want to go. It might be a kind of an attractive nuisance. And so I have some concerns over that. Just it's that linearness right there, having that park right there. That's just my concern. So that's all the questions I had and comments. Thank you. But overall, these are really interesting concepts. You have a tough job trying to figure out the pieces of puzzle and all the different layers that you're looking at. There's so many different layers. So I really appreciate the time and effort you guys have put into this.
Thank you for the comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Ohm.
Yeah,
Commissioner Antle.
I kind of want to step back a little and just ask maybe some more kind of how we got here type questions, and it's more related about, how you decided how much of what to put where. Because I know you said you did kind of a market analysis, and I'm kind of curious, like, compared to, how our comp plan looks at and distributes future projections and needs for housing. You had said, there's only so much appetite for commercial or office in terms of a market. I'm curious about the multifamily option. I know certainly we need to provide affordable housing. That sounds like it's more like a rental housing product, and so I'm kind of curious, like, I see a lot of apartments in Wheat Ridge, but I don't know this overall. Like, do we, like, what's the occupancy rate of that to necessitate what we think is, such a large portion of the site potentially being dedicated to multifamily versus the demand we see for townhomes or, kind of aging in place housing or single family housing? I mean, I presume you guys have done some technical assessment in that area?
Yeah, so as far as sort of prioritizing the different types of housing, that was not part of our scope, but as
Oh.
far as looking at the absorption of different housing types, that was. So the multifamily, as indicated, as C happens to be on the screen currently. So C has what is it? About 22 acres of multifamily housing. It's unlikely that that could be absorbed over the next year or two, but the market analysis that we did looked at a 10 to 15-year absorption. Assuming that the height limit is retained across much of the rest of the community, the assessment is that a 4 to 5 story multifamily product across 22 acres could be absorbed over the next 10 to 15 years.
And that's even considering, I mean, this is partly rhetorical, I mean, this is considering the new multifamily housing we've built already. So our demand is there where we
Yes.
could absorb that, okay.
Yes.
And I realize, like, at the end of the day, this is gonna be sold, and obviously the person is gonna wanna make a profit, but I'm just trying to, do something that makes business sense for them, but I'm trying to get a sense of how do we best prepare and align this for what our community needs and kind of what our comp plan says.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the second question is thinking about, well, how we distribute and allocate our future needs for housing. So again, looking at all the housing we just built on 38th, the housing over at the corners, and then is this the, and this may be, again, beyond the scope of your project, maybe Lauren chime in on this, is, so having such a concentration of housing here, is this kind of where we're seeing that demand? Or, maybe it's speculative on my part, I'm just curious.
Yeah, they're really good questions. So our comprehensive plan is a little out of date. We do expect that we'll probably revisit that in the next couple of years. It's dated 2009, so it predates a lot of the demographic shifts and the changes in the housing market that we've seen in the metro area in the last 10 years. So it's not particularly helpful in terms of that level of detail that you're asking about. What it does tell us is that we want to, honor the character of established neighborhoods and sort of channel our growth to more appropriate areas, which this was not one that we were conceiving of at the time. Certainly since then, council has adopted policy documents that would call for a diversification of our housing stock. We do have a lot of rental units. About half of the city's housing stock of all types are rental. The 2020 census data, is starting to roll out slowly, and this week they released some of the data on housing. Our vacancy rates of all housing types is less than 4%. I think it's like 3.2% across the city. So vacancy rates are incredibly low. There's just a huge market demand for housing of almost any type, not unique to Wheat Ridge, right? Sort of metro-wide, which is what we found in the market study. And I mean, anecdotally, almost any type of housing is needed. For renters and for owners. And then from a location standpoint, I think, historically what we've tried to do, thinking about the market, backing up a little. So Wadsworth and 38th, we rezoned to mixed use districts because we knew that we needed a zoning that was more flexible to accommodate what the market was bringing us. So they're form-based codes where we know we'll get something that looks good, but we can adapt more easily to a residential versus a commercial land use and sort of market absorption. in doing that, we also, the Wadsworth Corridor and our transit areas are actually called urban centers. It's a Dr. Cog, it's a regional term that says we are regionally trying to drive certain numbers of houses and jobs to urban centers. So it's along Wadsworth and it's near the transit area. Again, this wasn't contemplated at the time, but would be a really eligible urban center. And just from a practical standpoint, both 32nd and 38th are transit routes. So if we're gonna add more housing, to have them in proximity to transit would be sort of a smart growth principle. So it would be appropriate. A lot of the questions you're asking are great because we didn't contemplate them before, which is why we're having to think about it more carefully now. But we do feel confident that showing this much residential is appropriate for what the community and the area needs. It's appropriate for the area in relation to other amenities and transit options. And, you know, we want to have a master plan that's realistic. So we don't want the site to sit forever. It's gonna take 15 years. It's been 15 plus years to see Clear Creek Crossing start to build out from the point it was first talked about at this level. So we needed to be a little bit flexible to accommodate what the market shift might be in 15 years. But we do feel confident that this is pretty realistic, accounting for both our community needs and what we think the market will come to us with in the next couple of years.
Okay, thank you. I do
Yeah.
have a few more questions. I
Sure.
know we can circle back, but just in terms of that, I still think I would rather see I would say the concept that has the least amount of multifamily and distribute that multifamily more towards Clear Creek Crossing because of my concern with maintaining kind of a specific neighborhood character in that area. You know, but that's just my preference. I equally want to ask a question about, you know, kind of thinking of the park concept. I really do see a deficit in larger park areas in our community. So curious about, do you have like an internal planning team that has participated in this and said, wow, is this an opportunity where the city could maybe come in and use some of its park dedication fees to provide for a larger park area? I hate to say regional park, but, you know, if we think about trying to create a stronger identity in Wheat Ridge, I mean, you've dedicated space for civic space, you know, and so maybe there's a library or something you envision there, but that would require city purchase to do that. I would advocate for, you know, looking, because we're hearing across the board the need for more parks and open space. And so I think something that envisions, you know, talk about creating a sense of place. So much of our identity is wrapped up in our ag heritage and the existing adjacency we have to open space and Clear Creek, all those types of things. And so I'd like to see a concept that really expands on that a little more, even if it involves some sort of coordinated funding with the city. Because like you said, this is like a once in a lifetime opportunity, and thinking about what will Wheat Ridge be in the future. You know, we're kind of contained here in this one little area, and we have a unique opportunity to kind of enhance our identity as a city itself, like, and one that's based on kind of celebrating our heritage, which is that kind of parks and ag heritage. So just thinking about that and how that may or may not align with your recent parks master plan, and any plans you have for civic uses that could be, you know, instead repurposed for parks. I think that's everything for now. I may think of something else, but I've dominated for a long time.
Thank you, Commissioner Antle. Commissioner Simbai?
I think these are more comments rather than questions. When I was thinking about this site, I was thinking of, I had the dream of like the mini downtown for Wheat Ridge, because we don't have something like that. And so the concept that came to my mind was density on the edge and then sort of like a reverse downtown. It got open in the middle, sort of more idyllic. That's not in any of these concepts, and I know Commissioner Disney would not like that idea, but I wanted to just throw that out. I mean, because in the perception of traffic, if things were on the edge and things in the middle were less dense, it seems like there would be no cut-throughs. There would be no reason to cut through because there's really nothing going on in the middle other than maybe walking space and a few homes here. So I just wanted to throw that out. But I am hearing what Commissioner Disney's saying. I mean, I'm interested in maybe more you expanding on what that looks like on 38th across. I'm not close. I mean, I'm close, but I'm not going to be affected in my home by this development. So I guess I would want to know the commissioners that are close. I'd love to hear more about what that edge looks like to you all, so I can, just have that for my own information.
Thank you, Commissioner Senbai. Commissioner Disney?
Maybe just to respond quickly, so from a market standpoint, there's just not a whole lot of demand, and we don't want to cannibalize 38th and Watt, so there wouldn't be enough square footage or acreage to go around the entire perimeter and fill it. From a sort of blank slate urban design standpoint, you're right, like an old traditional, neo-traditional downtown, you start with the density and you wrap the neighborhood around it. We, as you all know, have observed infill like this. It's a much harder model to bring to a community that feels really well established. So we have tried really hard through this process. You heard us at the very outset of trying to balance the market realities with the public input, because we know we have 10 years of entitlements, the zone change next, and then site plans and specific development plans. And we really want to come up with a design. While some people would love that idea, and while you definitely would see that in sort of a new urbanism model, it's probably not politically the most realistic for our community. And certainly the resident opinion is welcome. We're all zoning and land use nerds at heart. So if this was a grad school project grad student who hadn't gone through as many public hearings as we've all done, that might be something that came to the top earlier. But we've tried to stick to our commitment to the community to really let their voice drive some of this outcome. And I can be pretty honest in saying that has not been the majority opinion so far. It's a great idea, and it's a really cool urbanistic design, but just not one that this particular neighborhood has supported.
Thank you, Lauren. Commissioner Hall?
Yeah, and I attend, I'm a landscape architect, and when I attend public commission planning commission meetings, that the biggest crux of anything is always about buffering, especially when you have, single family, residential housing and what's going to go next to it. That I can see the merit of what you're saying, but to propose anything that is going to be, really tall next to that, it's going to be a really impossible mountain to climb. And I see what they're doing. The concept is there's, the lowest density is kind of around the outer edge. Then you're building up some of that density, but we have a unique situation where we have that existing hospital that can be, adapted reuse. But the one comment, or I guess I have question is when I look at that, and it's a very interesting site, because these roads, the way they kind of come together, and they're kind of curvy, and then we got that Rocky Mountain ditch. It's a very unique geography, and then the elevation differences. When I look at this, the first thing I think of, and I know we're looking at the buffering, we're looking at the density, is I just keep thinking, and like I said, I've spent a lot of time. I biked up and down Dudley, and I biked up and down Lutheran Parkway many, many times, and I've walked by it. Is I just feel like the heart of this project kind of wants to be, as we're looking at this concept C, is like where that multifamily is. I feel like that's really kind of the heart. You're up in the high ground, and whatever that is, that wants to be kind of like the soul and the energy for the project. I don't know what that is. I don't know if that needs to be like, a civic center that has, and I don't know, maybe that needs to be more like a mixed use, like a true mixed use with it, maybe a little bit of retail, a little bit of civic, and maybe some higher density housing. But I really feel that like that is really kind of the heart, and everything else kind of gravitates around that area, because it's right there in the middle of everything. There's two roads coming together. You're on that. When you're out at that site, you're at the highest. So whatever gets built, kind of in that general area, I really feel like that's going to be the sweet spot. If it's a townhome, if it's multifamily, that's where I'd want my views. I'd want to be in that particular area, whatever that's going to be.
That's where the park goes. Think of how they
I-
designed Flat River Park downtown,
Mhm.
where the highest point of that park, you know,
Yeah.
that big green hill,
I-
and then they have the housing around that. And so
Yes.
it's like, I really like the way you organize that thought. It's like, it is kind of with the elevation, it kind of becomes the heart or the defining feature.
Yes.
So my mind says the park.
Yeah. No, I
know
agree. And what I was,
You want the new urbanist.
I know. I mean, that's why I'm thinking maybe it's a mix. I have seen a subdivision north in Nevada where that's exactly what it was. Is you had the park like right in the middle, and everything gravitated around that, and that was the center, the soul of the community place. Yes.
Or it's civic, I guess.
It could be civic too. Yeah.
That's why I like in concept A, in that area that you're talking about, Commissioner Ohm, we have the civic. If you could flip it, I mean, if you're going to use the existing hospital for housing, I have doubts about the feasibility of that based on comments I've heard from people who have worked in that building, construction workers, and people who say that there's, boy, a lot of asbestos, and especially in the Blue House. That's the reason why the Blue House isn't being utilized, is because there's a lot of asbestos in it. Maybe that's a rampant rumor. But I like the idea of less, Commissioner O'Toole, multi-family and townhomes, seniors, more parks. I know that density provides opportunity for some affordable housing. I'm not sure how much affordable housing you'll be able to put in here based on market demand. I know that there are many seniors that live in the surrounding area that want to stay in Wheat Ridge, and there's really no place for them to go. And they might not necessarily want to be living in a development like there is at 44th and Wadsworth. But townhomes don't work for seniors because they don't want to walk up and down stairs. That's why Wheat Ridge is attractive, because we have so many ranches here. So it is a very difficult thing, but I do like the idea of the heart of that property being someplace where people can gather with parks and amenities. An amphitheater would be nice, although we have that really nice pavilion now in Anderson Park. I got to listen to Hazel Miller during the Carnation Festival, and man, was the sound amazing, and man, was she good. So it would be nice to have something like that a little bit closer to 38th, east of, Wads, someplace where people could walk and just mingle. So that's my last comment.
Commissioner Disney, if I may, I have 4 questions I'd like to throw out at you guys. First, what is the real potential for reuse of the existing hospital building? Not counting the chapel or the Blue House, but the existing hospital building. would you say that in terms of square footage, about half is the north tower?
Steve, did you hear that question? Do you have a sense of if the North Tower accounts for about half the square footage of the hospital? If you know it, you can unmute.
Yeah, no, I think it's roughly about a third of the total square footage of the hospital.
Okay.
But I mean, it's a significant part, and it's important. I couldn't hear what was said earlier, but a good deal of the portion of that is currently shelved space as well.
Thanks.
So it would seem likely that when it comes time to develop that, the existing buildings, one may be okay for recycling and the others probably would not.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with the North Tower is that it is new space. The problem is getting the infrastructure to support it because the cut that's currently supporting the larger hospital, that would have to change, and hospital infrastructure to support a building that's not medical anymore. You'd want a more cost-effective structure as it relates to electrical, air handling, et cetera. So that's probably the engineering conundrum there, is that if we take down the other parts of the hospital, how do you support that? How do you support the North Tower?
And I think Steve used the term CUP, that's Central Utility Plant.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, that makes sense then. You'd mentioned that there are the two medical office buildings in Zone 3 that are not owned by SCL, they're owned by a REIT.
There's 3 of them, yes.
How many?
3 medical
Three of
office
them,
buildings
right,
there.
Right, the ones most people are familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Does that not create a bit of a hurdle for this project to get over if there's an existing use there, and if the owners decide that they want to continue operating a medical office building while all this development is going on, a potential developer would look at that as an empty space, a sort of a difficult thing to get around. It's like when you see the pictures of the high-rise building and the guy with the office or the house right in the middle, surrounded by this brand-new building because he didn't want to sell.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that create an issue?
Well,
We don't,
go ahead.
we don't think so. I mean, it's similar to how when we rezoned 38th Avenue to mixed-use neighborhood, we're not trying to get rid of anybody or any building, right? It all sort of contributes to the quirkiness of Wheat Ridge. I mean, in this case, to be honest, the city's interested in moving municipal facilities potentially into one of those buildings. We've outgrown City Hall. From a developer's standpoint, they would welcome the fact potentially that there are buildings with tenants already in them, or buildings that are already built, or could be occupied. So it's ever evolving, right? This is a 20-year plan, and it's going to take even longer to sort of have its first and second and third iteration. So it's certainly a consideration, because there are scenarios where they go away potentially and scenarios where they stay, and we don't have a crystal ball, but we're accustomed, I think, especially as an infill community, to sort of working with what we've got and knowing that that group doesn't need to decide it, now or immediately, sort of what their plans are.
Sort of cross that bridge when you're talking to a potential investor.
Exactly. Yep.
Does the Real Estate Investment Trust own the parking lots?
We own the parking lot, and we ground lease the space to them. They own the buildings, but we own the land.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And how do you define civic space?
That's a very good question. So in our conversations, it's evolved a bit, honestly. Originally, we were thinking that it would be a civic, or a campus, kind of a mini campus of civic facilities. And in the various conversations, while that is still true, that we'd consider at least one or more civic buildings or facilities being a part of that civic designated area. A lot of discussion has been about the large central park, a plaza space to host events, this idea of maybe a flexible amphitheater, type of space. So I think it would be all of the above.
It could it could be any number of things.
Correct, yeah.
From a library to a fountain.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
cultural, gathering, government.
Performing art.
Yeah. Your comment and discussion earlier about really wanting the site to have sort of placemaking and center of gravity has definitely been a theme from the general public and from our sort of development and business focus groups. So that's when Civic kind of evolved into a more exciting version of Civic, but could likely include all of the versions. Yeah.
And then, one of the things, and I brought this up in our last meeting, was the net loss for that part of the city in terms of jobs. And so rather than get into the sort of potential for any sort of, well, let me just back up here. When you guys look at market dynamics and you look at potential down the road, and we hear so much today about how the pandemic has sort of cratered the office market. Is there any potential for new office space to attract customers?
Yes, yeah. Class A new office space definitely is attracting customers. They tend to want amenities nearby at this point in time. And so particularly if we were able to couple, a reasonable amount of office with, maybe retail destinations or dining, this great kind of civic or open space, it could definitely be attractive.
And the potential for different types of commercial properties, from office space to retail. It just seems that in most of the concepts, it is kind of sort of a second or an afterthought. And I understand the importance of housing. I understand the importance of open space. But again, given the fact that the hospital and many of the jobs are going away, and some of them are migrating out to Clear Creek, it would be, I think, it would speak very well of the city of Wheat Ridge to develop some attractive commercial or office or retail space basically in the heart of the city.
Yeah, so I think it was concept B. Again, this idea of this mixed use is more about creating that flexibility to, if the office market were to bounce back, if, we achieve a certain level of sort of, I guess, number of new residents, and the residents that are nearby already really support the retail, maybe there's more retail potential, creating that flexibility. So not necessarily that has to be in this configuration, but the concept of, an area being devoted to this kind of flexible mixed use, I think is intended to respond to your comments, sir.
Great, thank you. And Commissioner Carnes, I apologize. Did you have a question?
I have a lot of comments, and I'm going to try to keep it short because it's already 8:30. This project is literally in my backyard. I'm on 32nd Ave between Cody and Dudley, and I'm a YIMBY. I like this. I think this is going to be a fantastic asset to the community, and I really think you're doing a great job, Jay.
Thank you very much.
And you're doing some hard work here, and it shows, and I really appreciate the work you're doing. Okay, so let's get started. Concept A, I think this is the best park design. This park seems like it flows the best. It follows the Rocky Mountain Ditch. I think it's going to make the best use of large existing trees. I really like the large civic area, but I get that it's taking up a lot of space in what could be sort of the urban core of this development. The mixed use at 38th Ave and the retail seems realistic to me for being this far off of Wadsworth. So I think that sort of makes sense to me in terms of the sizing of it. And multifamily, yeah, I think you could easily switch that with the Civic. But, I don't know, that multifamily area seems like it's already in, a place where there's already a large existing structure, so I don't feel like it's gonna really encroach on the neighborhood too much, because there's already a giant building there, so. Concept B, I think that the civic space is a little bit small. I do like the large mixed-use area in the north side. I think that makes sense for that large building. The townhomes on the west and south seem pretty close to the R1 residential, but I do like the amount of park space that you've integrated some park space in with those townhomes. And then concept C, I love the Main Street that you've proposed. I understand Commissioner Ohm's concern about that sort of linear park behind it. I'm wondering if we could do something where we just expand some of that retail space, but then you're butting up against those homes behind there. So I think that if we had a hard time leasing all that space along that Main Street, that you could easily turn it into an art district for the city. Like, rent it out to artists. It'd be a fun use for that if it's tough to find leasees for all that. Let's see. Multifamily in the core seems a little much, but I get that we need more housing options in this city. This option has the largest amount of parks from my calculations, and I think this option also has the best step down from the center core down to the low-density residential at the edges. Okay, so my comments. Could the Blue House and Chapel become civic uses? Is that a possibility? I don't know, something to think about. Then Dudley, Dudley Street needs a sidewalk. It has a sidewalk partially, but it ends at where the hospital campus begins. So when Commissioner Ohm was mentioning, people needing to walk to the high school, in order to do that, they're gonna walk down Dudley to the south. And there's no sidewalk currently, but maybe one could be built as part of this development. And then my other comment is about the roadway connections to the south from this campus to 32nd Ave. 38th Ave gets 2 connections, and it sounds like both of those could be signalized. However, all the traffic going south gets collected into one access point, Lutheran Parkway. And to me, it seems like, now we have to have another signal or we have to put a signal on 32nd, which I know a lot of my neighbors don't want. At the same time, my neighbors also don't want the grid connections, which I'm more in favor of because it would disperse traffic and give people more of an option of how to access this site without necessarily everybody congregating at Lutheran Parkway and 32nd Avenue. So I know that the transportation connections aren't part of this study as of yet. It sounds like we need to pick a concept and then we're gonna do the transportation planning. So just, I guess my comment in feeding into that is, please look at connecting to the grid on 32nd and not just collecting everybody, all these 2,100 units potentially into this one southern connection. I know it might be unpopular, and I know it might be sort of politically, definitely probably politically unpopular with some of my neighbors who live on these probably great dead-end streets that have no traffic, but if we want to avoid a signalization on 32nd Ave, it seems like a no-brainer to just connect to all these streets, connect to the grid, and disperse traffic. So If we cannot connect to the grid, can we connect pedestrian connections to the grid? That's my other comment is if it's really unpopular to connect up this grid, let's make sidewalk connections so so it's easy to access this development on bike and on foot. People can easily get out to 32nd Ave and out to Crown Hill Park. And I think that's all I had.
Thank you, Commissioner Kern. Commissioner Ohm.
I got two last questions. Do you know, are you keeping the Rocky Mountain Ditch pedestrian crossings, or are you allowed to make new pedestrian crossings?
I think ultimately that would be up to the developer and the Rocky Mountain Ditch Company, but we're presuming that they would be retained and maybe even enhanced.
Okay, because if they're open to that dialogue, I really would like to see further dialogue beyond this project to have other pedestrian crossings, just for a pedestrian connection, because like if you go further along like 32nd, there's some neighborhoods that could easily cross the pedestrian. I live off of like Allison Street. I can see my house on this map here, but there's like the neighborhood to the east of this project, so south of 38th. When you're on 32nd, you can't cross over across that ditch, and so to get out the neighborhoods to the east of this, you kind of have to go all the way to Wadsworth to come all the way around and go on 38th to get access. And just to have a pedestrian crossing would be huge. But I think that would be maybe an opportune time to have that conversation with the ditch company. And then the other comment I have is anybody familiar with McGregor Square down by the Rocky Stadium? Maybe not.
Well, I went down when the All-Star game was in town, and they had kind of an open house.
Yeah, I like it. It's a really interesting project. If you haven't checked it out, please do. And the reason is because what they've done is they've really done a good job of designing space. They made these buildings separate, and you can just feel that energy is like in the middle. They have like this little grass amphitheater, and then you're watching the TV. I think it's just a really interesting space of how they've made that space work, and it's like energized, and you kind of want to be a part of that space. I think that'd be an interesting idea. Not as tall, obviously, is what they have it, but just something like that where you're really creating a space that is energized.
Thank
So
you.
I'm anticipating a request for a 3-story high television screen. Any other questions? Commissioners? Well, we can wrap this section up. Move on to our next item. The next item is new business. Any other, this was new business, wasn't it, for our study session? I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Let's do old business. Is there anything from staff that we'd like to discuss?
The only thing I wanted to share with you is a preview of our schedule. We have a lot of land use cases that we're working on right now, sort of an immense amount compared to the beginning parts of this year. So we do expect to utilize both meetings in September, the 2nd and the 16th, and very likely both meetings in October, which would be the 7th and the 21st. It's a variety of quasi-judicial cases and I think 3 code amendments, and the master plan. So we'll be
Right.
busy before the holidays.
And the draft master plan was September?
October. We'll have
October.
the draft at a public meeting in September on the 22nd and also posted online, but then the hearings in October,
Okay.
both at Planning Commission and Council.
Will that second session in September be a study session, or will there be activity?
All cases, all 4 of those dates will be land use cases
Okay.
or
Thank you.
code amendments.
Well, I guess the quiet summer is over.
The quiet summer, your summer sabbatical has ended, indeed.
Any other comments from our commissioners this evening? Hearing none, we will adjourn the meeting. Can I ask for a motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Second? Let's go for a vote.
Motion passed 6-0.
Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.